Hello. In this video today, I want to talk about an important subject, and that subject is the economics of facade inspections. So, if you think about facade inspections, which is essentially the inspection of the exterior wall of a building, typically a tall building, you would imagine that that's something that costs a lot of money, and that's true. Facade inspections are actually a very expensive process, but a very, very important and much required process given where we are with safety with our buildings. And so, one of the things that's really interesting to me is actually the economics of facade inspections and how they're quickly changing. So, in this video, what I want to do is I want to actually go through the traditional methods that are used for facade inspections, how much does everything cost, and is there a better way? Let's have a look. Hey everyone, I'm Varun from Hammer Missions, and in this particular video, what we want to do is we want to cover the economics behind facade inspections. We want to try and sort of understand this in a bit more detail in terms of how much do things cost if you have to inspect the facade of a tall building, let's say a 10 plus story building, and try and understand if there is a better way of doing things. So, let's start with the US. Let's look at what is a facade inspection and let's try and understand the costs behind it. So, a facade inspection is essentially the inspection of the exterior wall of a tall building, commonly found in places with high-rise buildings, and this is typically major cities all around the US, in the UK, Asia, and more. And these inspections are sometimes required because there's a regulatory requirement. So maybe you need to do this inspection every couple of years or every 5 years because there is a certain law that mandates this inspection for safety of both the building and also the safety of people using or being around the building. So that's the reason for facade inspections. There's also other reasons why you might want a facade inspection. We know that as buildings age, they tend to have more repair requirements, they tend to have more remediation requirements, and so being able to inspect the facade at a regular cadence is really important. Not to say that there is other maintenance issues which might pop up after a storm or after a insurance claim, and therefore you might want to sort of like have different reasons and different methods in place for doing these facade inspections. Now that we understand what a facade inspection is, let's try and understand what are the typical costs of a facade inspection. So, if you had to sort of use some of the traditional methods to inspect a facade, you'd be looking at many different ways. So, let's look at one of the most common ways to inspect a high-rise building. So, one of the most common methods is actually a swing stage scaffold. A swing stage scaffold essentially costs somewhere between 30K to 50K a month to actually put up and to inspect the facade. And this is basically a structure that is suspended from the facade, which allows you to actually get access to the facade. So you essentially get on top of the structure, whether you are an engineer, whether you're a qualified professional, whether you are actually doing the repairs, or if you're a subcontracted third party. You basically have this platform that is mounted on the facade that you get on top of to be able to inspect the building. And so, as I mentioned already, that costs anywhere between 30 to 50K or more a month for that inspection to be performed. The other method to actually do a facade inspection is something called rope access. So, as the name implies, with rope access, what you're essentially trying to do is you're trying to suspend yourself from a rope to the facade of the building to be able to get access. Now, as you can imagine, this method does bring on some challenges. You need to have a lot of experience to be able to handle yourself on a rope. And it's also sort of begs the question, do we really want to have those levels of safety concerns where we are today in 2025 with respect to all the technology? So, but anyway, rope access is a method that is frequently used to be able to inspect facades. And that can cost anywhere between 8 to 12K a day. The costs really vary based on where you are in terms of the geography, in terms of the labor costs. But rope access is also another commonly used method for facade access. The third method is actually something called boom trucks. So boom trucks are essentially a method where you would have a truck that is basically mounting a lift, and then that lift is actually responsible for doing the access because that rises onto the facade. Now, this method is only applicable for some of the smaller facades, the shorter facades where you're able to actually get access to all of the different floors of the building. So boom trucks can cost anywhere between 5 and 10K, maybe more like 6, 7K. And that sort of all depends on whether you need to get special permissions to close off the streets for the truck to be present, whether you need to have other logistics in place. And so boom trucks is sort of like the third method that you would frequently encounter when it comes to facade inspections. Now, I'm sure you've sort of seen a pattern here that with whether it's the boom truck, whether it's a rope access, whether it's a swing stage scaffold, all of these methods actually cost a lot of money. And of course, they need to cost a lot of money because ultimately you're trying to get access to a difficult access place, which is for the facade. The inspection is important. And, we need to make sure we value the equipment, the labor, the time that goes into doing these things. And it's really, really important that that's sort of accounted for. Now, the thing is that you're not just paying for the equipment and the labor, you're also paying in time because a lot of this requires heavy coordination. You might have a day where you can do the access or you can't do the access. You need to get permits from multiple stakeholders. And so there is a cost of time as well, which is really hard to quantify and really depends on the project in terms of how quickly do you need to get that facade inspection out? Is there a report that needs to be submitted? And so you are paying in somewhat in the logistics and the time that it takes to be able to actually capture that facade. Now, the other thing that you have to bear in mind that there's also the cost of the qualified engineer or the professional, as it should be. And that can essentially cost anywhere between $150 to $300 an hour in terms of doing the inspection itself. And this is to actually look at all the data. So whether you're using a rope access or you're using a boom truck, essentially an engineer would be sometimes going on the rope or going on the boom truck and actually physically inspecting the facade with their hands to be able to understand if there is any loose surfaces, if there is what are the actual existing conditions on the facade. And that can cost anywhere between $150 to $300 an hour. In geographies where an engineer's time is more expensive, the costs might go all the way up to $500 an hour. So essentially, you have all of these different costs that rack up. So when you sort of look at all of these different things, when you look at the cost of the equipment, the cost of the labor, the cost of the engineer, the qualified professional, I mean, you're generally looking at least 50K in costs for the tall facades over 10-story buildings, and you're looking at more like 100K in real costs when you put in the time, labor, equipment, and all of that. So that's kind of what you need to budget for facade inspections. Now, the good news is there is a better way, and there's always a better way. And it's probably no surprise to you that there's a drone in my background as I do this video. So essentially, drones are a new way that actually help you with facade inspections. As is the case with technology from the dawn of time has been a better way to do things and has been deflationary, leads to reduction in costs, leads to increased value. And so drones are actually a great way for you to be able to get access in difficult to access places such as facades. And so in most cities now, visual inspections using drones have become accepted by the Department of Buildings, by the regulator. And so these tools can be used to essentially at least get the first scan of the facade done very quickly. And so what you do here is you essentially get a drone and you have a qualified professional with the drone, or this could be your engineer itself, or it could be a third-party drone operator that's actually able to fly the drone and capture images of the facade in the right places. Using those images, you can now essentially conduct the inspection to be able to understand where you might have the most amount of deficiencies, the most amount of issues and challenges. And one of the things to really bear in mind over here is that even if you have a law in the city you're operating in where hands-on inspection needs to be done, drones can still be a great way for you to be able to mobilize quicker and to know where to put that swing stage scaffold first, or where to actually have that rope access first, or how many drops do you need to do. And so all of those different things can actually be planned in a much better fashion if you've got that first great look at the facade of the building. Now, drones are actually great tools that take images, but ultimately it's all about the data. It's all about how you take those images and you combine them into a unified format that you can actually understand what is going on with the facade. A typical drone operation would cost anywhere between 5K to 10K, maybe less if you are much more efficient, or if the qualified inspector engineer you're working with already has a drone team, they might be able to do it a lot cheaper in terms of the actual effectiveness because they've already got a well-oiled process. But what you have to understand that if you're using drones for facade inspections, you're fundamentally getting a new deliverable. You're able to actually cover 100% of the facade as opposed to 10% of the facade or 25% of the facade. A common challenge because of difficult access of the facade is that you're only actually covering 15 to 20% of the facade and then sort of extrapolating for the rest of the facade in terms of the conditions that we're seeing. And that's no good because we know that what if you have that remaining 75% of the facade that has a really, really difficult existing condition and that requires urgent repairs. And so being able to see the entire facade in itself is a fundamentally new deliverable. At the same time, you're able to also, because of the cost of the operation of drones being so less compared to traditional methods, you can actually capture the existing conditions before repairs and the conditions after repairs and have that peace of mind that you've got everything repaired adequately and you have no issues with respect to sort of the working with the contractor or the engineer or the architect on the project. And so essentially having that before and after view can be a great way to ensure that the work has been performed as expected. And lastly, what you get with drones is fundamentally a new deliverable. As opposed to just getting a drawing of the facade, you can actually get a 3D model of the entire building, if not one facade. And you can actually use things like AI to document the conditions and interact with the building in a completely new, fundamentally new way. We're sort of seeing this all over the place, everywhere in the US, in the UK, in Asia. And we find that actually facade inspections and drones are this great marriage that would over time just lead to a lot of efficiency and a lot of productivity in this space, and at the end of the day lead to safer buildings and a safer built environment, which is all what we're hoping for. So anyway, thank you so much for listening to this video. Hopefully it was enlightening in terms of the costs involved in traditional facade inspections, what drones can bring into the table, and also the costs involved with the new, efficient, better way of doing the drone first facade inspection method. Thanks so much for listening. We are Hammer Missions. We are a software AI firm that actually specialize in facade inspections using drones. We don't do the inspection ourselves, but we partner with drone pilots, engineers, property managers, and more to be able to enable this whole ecosystem of drone-based inspections. So if you're curious to learn more from over 5,000 projects that we've already seen with drones, feel free to get in touch. We'd love to hear and connect with you. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you in the next video for Hammer Missions.